On March 25, 2022, the Marquette County Sheriff's Office in Michigan received a 911 call that would launch an investigation reaching halfway across the world. A 17-year-old high school senior named Jordan DeMay had been found unresponsive in his home. When detectives arrived, nothing looked like a typical crime scene. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of drugs or violence. But within minutes of examining his phone, investigators realized they were looking at a new kind of crime, one committed through a screen. The digital trail began with a series of direct messages sent the night before on Instagram and Snapchat. At first glance, they looked harmless, a conversation between a teenage boy and somebody believed to be a girl his age. But behind the profile picture was not a classmate, not even an American. It was part of a criminal network operating thousands of miles away, using stolen photographs and scripted messages to target teenage boys online. To understand what followed, you have to know who Jordan DeMay was. Friends described him as gentle and funny, the kind of person who made everyone around him feel safe. He played sports, worked part-time, and had just received his senior year photos. His parents later told reporters he was the light in every room, a kid with plans for college and a big heart for people. There was no reason to believe a conversation online could endanger him. But in the digital age, predators don't break into homes. They log in. According to court filings later unsealed by the U.S. Department of Justice, the first message to Jordan came from an Instagram account using the name Danica. The account had only a handful of posts, all attractive photos lifted from another young woman's profile. The messages were friendly, then flirtatious. Within an hour, the tone shifted to something more personal. And then came the moment that investigators later identified as the start of the extortion scheme. The person behind Danica convinced Jordan to share a private image. Seconds after he did, the conversation changed. The friendly tone disappeared, replaced by threats. If he didn't send money immediately, the image would be sent to his friends, family, and classmates. The blackmailer demanded $1,000 through an online payment app. Jordan explained he didn't have that kind of money. The threats escalated. These messages, later recovered from his phone, would become central evidence in a case that exposed an international sextortion ring. Marquette County Sheriff Greg Zybert told local media that within hours of the 911 call, detectives began tracing the digital footprints. They issued preservation orders to Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook parent company Meta. Working with the FBI's Digital Crimes Unit, they matched the IP address to Takoradi, Ghana, a coastal city nearly 5,000 miles away. That single discovery transformed the case from a local tragedy into an international criminal investigation. At the time, very few people had heard the term sextortion. Law enforcement data showed it was becoming one of the fastest-growing online crimes targeting minors, a crime that blends identity theft, blackmail, and emotional manipulation. The FBI later said that in 2022 alone, over 3,000 teenagers in the United States were victims of similar schemes, with dozens of families reporting outcomes as devastating as Jordan's. But his case would become the one that forced authorities and social media platforms to confront the danger head-on. Agents downloaded every piece of data they could recover from Jordan's devices: message logs, screenshots, payment requests, and timestamps. One detail stood out. The extortionists had sent identical messages to other accounts within the same hour. The language, grammar, and payment address matched patterns in several open FBI cases linked to Ghanaian suspects. By mid-April 2022, investigators had tied the username to Samuel Ofori, Felix Blay, and Bright Osei, three young men operating from cybercafes in Takoradi. The ring's method was disturbingly systematic. 1. Create fake female profiles using stolen photos. 2. Contact young men aged 14 to 18. 3. Obtain compromising images. 4. Threaten to release them unless paid immediately. Each conversation was scripted, each victim treated as a transaction. When the charges were unsealed in 2023, U.S. Attorney Mark Totten announced, "These defendants targeted a child, exploited his trust, and used fear to take his money. Their conduct was criminal, and the consequences were tragic." The FBI's Detroit field office added in its press release, "Sextortion is a growing epidemic. We want parents and teens to know this is not about shame, it's about crime. Those statements became part of a larger campaign urging social media users to report threats immediately rather than comply with demands. Jordan's family later shared that they had no idea he'd been contacted by strangers online. There were no visible warning signs, no shift in behavior that suggested danger. The deception unfolded entirely through private messages. In the months following the investigation, his parents spoke publicly to help other families recognize the signs. His mother told CBS News he thought he had ruined his life in a moment, but it was the people on the other end who ruined it. They were criminals, not victims. The case prompted a nationwide conversation about online safety. Schools in Michigan and across the Midwest began adding sextortion awareness programs to their digital citizenship courses. The FBI launched the Stop Sextortion Initiative, public service announcements warning that any demand for money or images in exchange for silence is a crime. Meta, Snap, and TikTok issued new safety prompts reminding users to report suspicious messages instantly. In the quiet weeks after the funeral, the Marquette community turned its grief into outreach. Local organizations held seminars with cybercrime experts, psychologists, and parents who had lived the same nightmare. Their message was simple but urgent. You are never alone, and no photo, no mistake, no threat is worth your life. Meanwhile, the federal investigation continued. Through cooperation between the FBI and the Ghana Police Service, authorities tracked the IP addresses to 2 residential buildings in Takoradi. Surveillance led to the arrest of 3 suspects who confessed to running multiple fake accounts aimed at American teenagers. Their phones contained hundreds of profiles, chat scripts, and payment screenshots, digital evidence of a global enterprise. In 2023, the U.S. Department of Justice filed formal extradition requests and charged the men with conspiracy to sexually exploit a minor attempted sexual exploitation and sending extortionate threats causing death. The charges carried potential sentences of life imprisonment if convicted in the United States. The contrast was unbearable. On one side, a high school senior who wanted to make people laugh. On the other, strangers who viewed teenagers as digital targets, their trust as currency. It wasn't a random tragedy. It was a preventable crime. In later interviews, Sheriff Zybert said that what stayed with him most wasn't the complexity of the cyber trail, but the speed. From first message to blackmail, from fear to silence, it happened in under 6 hours. He told ABC News, "These predators know exactly how to trigger panic. They count on the victim feeling there's no one to call, but there's always someone to call." The investigation was far from over. Federal agents were still tracing payment apps, analyzing devices, and working through diplomatic channels to bring the suspects to trial. For Jordan's family, justice was slow, but it had begun. The crime started with a message, a few words sent to a stolen profile. But the echoes of that message reached every parent, every classroom, every young person who has ever trusted the wrong stranger online. After Jordan DeMay's death, grief hung over Marquette like winter fog, heavy, silent, and everywhere. But within that silence, law enforcement was already moving. From Michigan to Washington, D.C., a small group of digital crime experts began following the trail Jordan unknowingly left behind, a trail written in code, IP addresses, and timestamps. To them, this wasn't just a single tragedy. It was part of a pattern. And that pattern pointed to a criminal network that had learned how to weaponize trust. Inside the FBI's Detroit field office, Special Agent Rex Miller led the case analysis. His team started by mapping every online interaction on Jordan's phone during the 24 hours before the extortion. Messages were time-stamped between 11:13 p.m. and 1:45 a.m. The IP data placed the sender in Takoradi, Ghana, routed through a VPN used frequently by scammers operating on Facebook and Instagram. By cross-referencing chat logs with similar complaints from other states, agents began to see familiar phrasing. "Send me $1,000 now, or everyone sees this. Don't tell anyone or I'll ruin your life." Each message was nearly identical, word for word. The pattern confirmed what agents suspected. This was industrialized blackmail, not an isolated predator. At the same time, 4,800 miles away, in Takoradi, local investigators with Ghana's cybercrime unit were conducting raids on small apartments running internet cafes. Dozens of phones, routers, and SIM cards were seized. On one device, detectives found a WhatsApp chat labeled Boys USA. Inside it, screenshots, victim lists, and photos used to bait American teenagers. Among the files were the same images and usernames connected to Jordan's case. Back in Michigan, Jordan's parents were facing the impossible. Interviews, questions, and a community still in shock. But instead of turning inward, they went public. They began speaking to students, schools, and national news outlets about what had happened. Their message was clear. Jordan didn't die from shame. He died because of crime. Those words resonated across the country. Parents began checking phones. Teachers started conversations. And students shared stories of receiving similar threats. For many, this was the first time they realized extortion was real, not an internet myth. In April 2022, digital forensics experts traced the payment requests sent to Jordan through Cash App and Western Union. Each account was registered to fake American names, but routed to the same Ghanaian mobile number. That number belonged to Felix Blay, a 22-year-old who often acted as the money receiver for the group. Working with Ghanaian police, the FBI pinpointed two additional suspects, Samuel Ofori and Bright Osei, who handled the fake social media profiles. Ofori and Osei were skilled manipulators. They knew exactly how to appear trustworthy. They'd studied American slang, sports teams, and high school trends. To a teenager online, they looked and sounded like peers. This wasn't random cruelty. It was a business model. In chat transcripts later released by prosecutors, one suspect bragged that a good week could earn them up to $10,000 in extortion payments from victims too scared to report. They targeted boys because, in their words, boys panic faster. Each new victim was logged, each payment noted, and when a target refused to pay, the scammers simply moved on to the next, leaving behind real human wreckage. By summer 2022, Jordan's story had reached national headlines. ABC News, CBS, and the Associated Press covered the unfolding case. At the same time, the FBI issued a national warning. More than 7,000 reports of sextortion have been filed that year, many involving minors. Behind every statistic was a name, a real teenager, a real family. Marquette schools organized assemblies under the title Think Before You Trust. Counselors explained how predators manipulate emotion, first curiosity, then guilt, then fear. Parents described the heartbreak of realizing how easily a stranger could impersonate safety. Jordan's father spoke at one of those gatherings. If it could happen to Jordan, it could happen to anyone. This isn't about shame. It's about awareness. In November 2022, Ghana's National Police launched Operation Storm, targeting cybercrime rings working from rented flats in Takoradi and Accra. At 4 a.m., coordinated raids led to the arrest of Blay, Osei, and Ofori. Their phones were seized, each filled with conversations from U.S. teenagers. Digital forensics linked one of those phones directly to the Instagram account that contacted Jordan DeMay. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, over 100 victims were identified across the United States. The ring had extorted or attempted to extort nearly $120,000. When news of the arrest reached Marquette, it brought measured relief, not closure, but justice in motion. For Jordan's family, knowing that his case helped expose the larger network gave his loss meaning beyond tragedy. Federal prosecutors in Michigan worked with Ghanaian authorities on extradition. It took nearly a year of coordination through diplomatic channels. In December 2023, U.S. Attorney Mark Totten announced charges against the three suspects: conspiracy to sexually exploit a minor, attempted sexual exploitation of a minor, and sending extortionate communications resulting in death. Each charge carried severe penalties. Totten said in his statement, "These men treated fear as profit, but their actions will face justice, no matter where they hide." As the legal process unfolded, Jordan's family kept advocating. They launched a foundation promoting digital safety and mental health awareness. At school assemblies, students began standing up to share their own experiences, messages they'd ignored, threats they deleted, fears they kept to themselves. Jordan's story became more than a case file. It became a warning and a movement. In one interview, his mother said quietly, "We tell our kids not to talk to strangers. But in this world, the strangers come to them through a screen." Those words echoed through classrooms across Michigan and beyond. The FBI later confirmed that Jordan's case reshaped how tech companies responded to sextortion. Platforms like Meta and Snap implemented faster escalation systems. When minor reports an extortion threat, content moderation now flags it to law enforcement within hours. It was a direct outcome of what Jordan's case exposed. Agents began training school resource officers to recognize online coercion patterns. Digital forensics workshops expanded to include sextortion recognition modules. What had once been an overlooked form of cybercrime was now treated with the same seriousness as trafficking or exploitation. In early 2024, nearly 2 years after tragedy, the Department of Justice released a formal statement acknowledging the global partnership that made the arrests possible. It read, "This case reminds us that technology can be both the weapon and the key to justice. The same digital trail used to harm can be used to hold criminals accountable." In Marquette, people gathered at a candlelight event on the anniversary of Jordan's death. They didn't speak of what was lost, but of what could still be saved: other lives, other families, other futures. What began as a late-night message on a teenager's phone ended with the unmasking of an international crime ring. But the true impact of Jordan DeMay's story lies not in the courtroom, but in the awareness it sparked. It forced parents, platforms, and law enforcement to face an uncomfortable truth: that in the digital age, exploitation doesn't always look like danger. Sometimes it looks like a friend request. Justice can't bring Jordan back. But every message stopped, every child warned, every predator exposed. That's a legacy his story leaves behind. Justice moves slowly, especially when oceans stand in the way. But for the investigators who worked Jordan DeMay's case, distance was never an excuse. From the moment the suspects were identified in Ghana, the United States made one thing clear: the internet may hide a criminal's face, but it doesn't erase accountability. By late 2023, the FBI and Ghana Police Service had compiled hundreds of pages of evidence: chat transcripts, payment receipts, and seized devices. That digital record painted a damning picture: a coordinated sextortion ring that had targeted dozens of American minors using identical methods. The next step was one rarely seen in cybercrime cases: extradition. Through cooperation between the U.S. Department of Justice and Ghana's Attorney General, extradition requests were filed under international treaties covering sexual exploitation of minors. Ghanaian courts reviewed the case for months, balancing local jurisdiction and U.S. federal law. Finally, in late 2024, the suspects, Samuel Ofori, Felix Blay, and Bright Osei, were transferred into U.S. custody to stand trial in Michigan. It was a landmark moment. For the first time, African nationals accused of online sextortion, leading to an American teenager's death, would face prosecution in a U.S. federal court. Inside the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan, prosecutors laid out their case. The defendants had created false social media accounts, impersonated young women, and extorted money through threats of exposure. They demanded payment from minors who panicked and believed their lives were over. The prosecution described the network as cold, deliberate, and financially motivated. U.S. Attorney Mark Totten addressed the press after the indictment. These defendants caused a child to believe he had no future. They weaponized fear for profit, and the law will hold them accountable. The charges were sweeping: conspiracy to sexually exploit minors, attempted sexual exploitation, sending extortionate communications, causing death, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Each carried potential life sentences. The courtroom heard not only digital evidence, but expert testimony from FBI cyber analysts explaining how the ring functioned, how algorithms, anonymity, and stolen photos became tools of exploitation. The defense argued lack of direct intent, but prosecutors countered that intent was clear. They knew what fear could do. They used it anyway. While the case moved forward, Jordan's parents continued speaking publicly. They didn't attend every hearing. Some were too painful, but they followed every update. In interviews, they focused not on vengeance, but on prevention. His mother said softly to a reporter from The Guardian, "Justice matters, yes, but awareness That's what saves lives. Their message began reaching schools across the country. Organizations invited them to speak at digital safety summits. Psychologists, educators, and law enforcement officers joined forces to teach teens how manipulation online begins. Not with threats, but with charm. In the months that followed, the ripple effects of Jordan's case reached beyond Michigan. Lawmakers introduced new measures requiring social platforms to flag extortion-related reports faster. Several states proposed school curriculum updates focused on online coercion and digital self-defense. In Washington, D.C., the FBI and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children expanded their Stop Sextortion campaign globally, partnering with agencies in Canada, the UK, and Ghana. Billboards, PSAs, and online videos began carrying a consistent message. No threat online is the end. Speak up. Report. You are not alone. Meanwhile, in Takoradi, Ghanaian authorities began dismantling similar networks inspired by the original group. Local news outlets credited the joint FBI-Ghana investigation as a warning to cyber gangs who believed distance made them untouchable. Several more suspects were arrested within months. What began as one case in Michigan had now become a transcontinental law enforcement effort. Back in Marquette, the DeMay family founded a nonprofit, Let Out, dedicated to educating teenagers about online extortion and mental health. They visited schools, hosted seminars, and provided resources for young people who felt trapped in silence. Each event began with a simple message projected on the screen. A message can destroy, but it can also save. Jordan's friends participated too, sharing memories of his humor and kindness. One of them said, "He wasn't defined by what happened that night. He's defined by what changed because of him." As months passed, the story of Jordan DeMay became something larger than its tragedy. It became a turning point, a case that made parents look closer, platforms act faster, and predators think twice. In 2025, the Department of Justice cited it as one of the most significant sextortion prosecutions in U.S. history. But for the people of Marquette, justice was never just about a verdict. It was about reclaiming what fear had taken: trust, safety, and hope. In early 2025, after months of proceedings, 2 of the Ghanaian suspects accepted plea agreements. They admitted their role in the extortion ring and faced sentencing under U.S. federal law. The third suspect's case continued, but the precedent had been set. Distance was no longer protection. Online anonymity was no longer a shield. For Jordan's family, justice didn't mean celebration. It meant acknowledgement that what happened to their son mattered, and that his story would protect others. At a memorial service marking 3 years since his passing, hundreds gathered with candles and cell phones held high, the same devices once used for harm, now shining as symbols of awareness. His mother spoke to the crowd. Jordan wanted to make people smile. Now, he's saving them one conversation at a time. The internet that connected Jordan to danger also connected his story to the world. Parents in other countries reached out, sharing how his story helped them stop similar scams. The ripple of awareness had become a wave of prevention. It's easy to see the digital world as cold and untouchable, a place where criminals hide behind screens. But Jordan's case proved something else. That truth can travel just as far, that justice can cross oceans, and that awareness can save lives even when tragedy cannot be undone. Jordan DeMay was 17 years old. His story began with a message that ITN was a movement, a reminder that no threat is stronger than the truth, and no voice online should ever silence another.